I want to tell you about a pattern that almost nobody talks about honestly. Not because it's rare, but because it looks, from the outside, like generosity, like kindness, like one of the better qualities a person can have. And from the inside, it feels like love. Or at least, it feels like the closest thing to love that ever felt safe enough to reach for. I'm talking about people who give money, gifts, favors, financial help, not primarily because they want to give, but because somewhere deep in their psychology they learned that giving was the price of being wanted, that generosity was the mechanism of connection, that if they stopped giving, the people around them would stop staying. This is not a character flaw. This is a wound, wearing the costume of a virtue. Here is what the psychology of compulsive giving actually looks like in practice. It looks like the person who always picks up the check, who lends money they cannot afford to lend to people who may never repay it, who buys gifts that are slightly too expensive, who gives slightly too much, who finds it genuinely difficult to receive without immediately looking for a way to give back. It looks like the person who, when someone is distant or cold, reaches for their wallet before they reach for their words. Because money, or gifts, or favors, or financial rescue does something that words and presence cannot always guarantee. It creates obligation. It generates gratitude. It produces, at least temporarily, the warmth and attention that feels like love. Researcher Brene Brown has described this pattern as transactional connection, the attempt to purchase emotionally what should be freely given. And what makes it so psychologically persistent is that in the short term, it works. The giving produces warmth. The gift produces appreciation. The check produces smiles. The problem is that the warmth is real, but conditional. And the person giving can feel the difference, somewhere beneath the gratitude and the smile, between being loved and being accommodated. Here is what most people around the compulsive giver never see. The giving is not generous, it is anxious. Beneath every too large gift, every unnecessary loan, every insistence on paying is a quiet, chronic terror. The terror that if they stop giving, the people they love will recalculate, will find them less valuable, will drift toward people who offer more. Psychologists call this attachment anxiety, the persistent low-level fear that connection is conditional and can be withdrawn at any moment. Research from the University of California found that individuals with anxious attachment styles are significantly more likely to engage in what researchers termed financial appeasement, using money and gifts to reduce relational anxiety and secure connection. Financial appeasement. The phrase is clinical, but the experience is devastatingly human. Because what is happening is not generosity. What is happening is someone managing their terror of abandonment with the only tool that ever seemed to reliably work. The financial cost is obvious and real. People who give compulsively often find themselves in genuine financial difficulty, savings depleted, credit strained, unable to say no to a request even when no is the only rational answer. But the psychological cost is deeper and less visible, because the compulsive giver is trapped in a paradox. They give to feel loved, but the giving itself prevents them from ever knowing whether they are, because you cannot know if someone is staying for you when you are always paying for the stay. Every relationship built on financial generosity carries this quiet uncertainty at its core. Would these people be here if I stopped? Would they stay if I had nothing to give? The question never gets answered because the giving never stops long enough to find out. And so the giver gives more, trying to buy a certainty that money was never designed to purchase. There is something else that needs to be said here, and it is uncomfortable. People who give compulsively tend to attract people who take compulsively, not because they are unlucky, but because the dynamic is mutually reinforcing. The anxious giver needs to feel secure. The entitled taker needs someone to give, to feel valued. The arrangement works, practically, functionally, while both people are getting what their psychology requires. What it does not produce is genuine intimacy. What it does not produce is the love the giver was looking for when they started giving in the first place. Psychologist Harriet Lerner has written extensively about what she calls the over-functioning and under-functioning dynamic, where one person in a relationship consistently does more, gives more, manages more, and the other consistently receives. The overfunctioner believes they are being loving. The research suggests they are actually preventing the relationship from becoming equal. Because when you always give before anyone can give to you, when you preemptively meet every need before anyone has to think about yours, you train the people around you to need you, not to know you. The research on recovering from compulsive giving is not primarily about financial behavior. It is about the underlying belief that drives it. The belief that I am only lovable when I am useful. That belief has to be encountered directly, not argued with, not suppressed, but traced back to where it was first learned, examined honestly and slowly, through real relationships, through therapy, through the terrifying experiment of receiving without giving, revised. Psychologist Harriet Lerner found that when compulsive givers begin to practice what she called strategic restraint, deliberately holding back the giving impulse and observing what happens, one of two things occurs. Either the relationship adjusts and the other person begins to give more, which means the relationship was real, or the other person withdraws, which means the relationship was always primarily transactional. Both outcomes are informative. Only one is painful. The other, as terrifying as it is to reach, is the beginning of something that the giving never was. It is the beginning of being loved for free. There is one more thing the research shows, and it might be the hardest part of all. People who give compulsively are often genuinely terrible at receiving, not because they are ungrateful, but because receiving requires something that giving never does. It requires trust. When you give, you are in control. You are the one creating the warmth, managing the dynamic, securing the connection. Receiving means letting someone else do that. Letting someone else decide that you are worth the effort, letting someone show up for you without having earned it first. That kind of trust does not arrive easily when you spent your childhood learning that love had a price. But it is possible, and when it finally comes, when someone gives to you and you let them without rushing to give back, without calculating the debt, that is not just receiving a gift. That is finally believing you deserve one. If any part of this felt familiar, if you have ever felt the urge to give more when someone pulled away or found yourself unable to receive without immediately looking for a way to reciprocate, you are not too generous. You are someone who learned to make yourself necessary because being simply yourself never felt like enough. And that was never true. It just felt that way for a very long time. If this resonated, share it with someone who needed to hear it.